Nursery rhymes and pastime stories for children and kids of all ages.
Section 12 of American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matthew Reese. The Mandarin and the Butterfly. The Mandarin once lived in Kyang-ho, who was so exceedingly cross and disagreeable that everyone hated him. He snarled and stormed at every person he met, and was never known to laugh or be merry under any circumstances. Especially, he hated boys and girls, for the boys jeered at him, which aroused his wrath, and the girls made fun of him, which hurt his pride. When he had become so unpopular that no one would speak to him, the emperor heard about it and commanded him to emigrate to America. This suited the Mandarin very well, but before he left China, he stole the great book of magic that belonged to the wise
and
magician
pastime stories for children
Then, gathering up
and
his little
kids
store of
of
money,
all
he took ships
ages.
for America. He settled in a city of the Middle West, and of course started a laundry, since that seems to be the natural vocation of every Chinaman, be he coolie or Mandarin. He made no acquaintances with the other Chinamen of the town, who, when they met him and saw the red button upon his hat, knew him for a real Mandarin and bowed low before him. He put up a red and white sign, and people brought their laundry to him and got paper checks, with Chinese characters upon them in exchange, this being the only sort of character the Mandarin had left. One day, as the ugly one was ironing in his shop in the basement of 263.5 Main Street, he looked up and saw a crowd of childish faces pressed against the window. Most Chinamen make friends with children. This one hated them and tried to drive them away. But as soon as he returned to his work,
Nursery
they were back at the window
rhymes
again,
and
mischievously
pastime
smacking down upon him.
stories for
The naughty
children
Mandarin
and
uttered
kids
horrid
of all
words in the Manchu
ages.
language and made fierce gestures, but this did no good at all. The children stayed as long as they pleased, and they came again the very next day as soon as school was over, and likewise the next day and the next. For they saw their presence at the window bothered the Chinamen, and were delighted accordingly. The following day being Sunday, the children did not appear, but as the Mandarin, being heathen, worked in his little shop, a big butterfly flew in at the open door, and fluttered about the room. The Mandarin closed the door and chased the butterfly until he caught it, when he pinned it against the wall by sticking 2 pins through its beautiful wings. This did not hurt the butterfly, there being no feeling in its wings, but it made him a safe prisoner. This butterfly was of large size, and its wings were exquisitely marked by gorgeous colors laid out in regular designs, like the stained glass windows of a
Nursery
cathedral.
rhymes and pastime stories for children and kids of all ages.
Turning the pages slowly, he came to a passage describing how to understand the language of butterflies. This he read carefully, and then mixed a magic formula in a tin cup, and drank it down with a wry face. Immediately thereafter, he spoke to the butterfly in its own language, saying, "Why did you enter this room?" "I smelled beeswax," answered the butterfly. "Therefore, I thought I might find honey here." "But you are my prisoner," said the Mandarin. "If I please, I can kill you, or leave you on the wall to starve to death." "I expect that," replied the butterfly with a sigh. "But my race is short-lived anyway. It doesn't matter whether death comes sooner or later." "Yet, you like
Nursery
to live, do you
rhymes
not?"
and pastime stories for
Yes,
children
life is
and
pleasant and the
kids
world is
of
beautiful.
all
I do not
ages.
seek death. "Then," said the Mandarin, "I will give you life, a long and pleasant life, if you will promise to obey me for a time and carry out my instructions." "How can a butterfly serve a man?" asked the creature in surprise. "Usually they cannot," was the reply, "but I have a book of magic which teaches me strange things. Do you promise?" "Oh yes, I promise," answered the butterfly, "for even as your slave I will get some enjoyment out of life, while should you kill me, that is the end of everything." "Truly," said the Mandarin, "butterflies have no souls, and therefore cannot live again." "But I have enjoyed 3 lives already," returned the butterfly with some pride. "I have been a
Nursery
caterpillar and a
rhymes
chrysalis
and
before I became a
pastime
butterfly.
stories for
You were never
children
anything but a
and
Chinaman.
kids of all
Although I admit
ages.
your life is longer than mine." "I will extend your life for many days if you will obey me," declared the Chinaman. "I can easily do so by means of my magic." "Of course I will obey you," said the butterfly carelessly. "Then listen. You know children, do you not? Boys and girls?" "Yes, I know them. They chase me and try to catch me as you have done," replied the butterfly. "And they mock me and jeer at me through the window," continued the mandarin, bitterly. "Therefore, they are your enemies and mine. But with your aid and the help of the magic book, we shall have a fine revenge for their insults." "I don't care much for revenge," said the butterfly. "They are but children, and 'tis natural they should wish to catch such a
Nursery
beautiful
rhymes
creature
and
as I am.
pastime stories for
Nevertheless,
children
I care,
and kids
and you
of
must obey
all
me,"
ages.
retorted the mandarin harshly. "I, at least, will have my revenge." Then he stuck a drop of molasses upon the wall beside the butterfly's head and said, "Eat that while I read my book and prepare my magic formula." So the butterfly feasted upon the molasses, and the mandarin studied his book, after which he began to mix a magic compound in the tin cup. When the mixture was ready, he released the butterfly from the wall and said to it, "I command you to dip your 2 front feet into this magic compound and then fly away until you meet a child. Fly close, whether it be a boy or a girl, and touch the child upon its forehead with your feet. Whosoever is thus touched, the book declares, will at once become a pig, and will remain such forever after. Then return to me and dip your legs afresh in the contents of this cup.
Nursery
So shall all my
rhymes
enemies, the
and
children,
pastime
become miserable
stories
swine,
for
while no one
children
will think of
and
accusing you of
kids of
sorcery."
all ages.
"Very well. Since such is your command, I obey," said the butterfly. Then it dipped its front legs, which were the shortest of the 6, into the contents of the tin cup, and flew out of the door, and away over the houses to the edge of the town. There it alighted in a flower garden, and soon forgot all about its mission to turn children into swine. In going from flower to flower, it soon brushed the magic compound from its legs, so that when the sun began to set, and the butterfly finally remembered its master, the mandarin, it could not have injured a child had it tried. But it did not intend to try. "That horrid old Chinaman," it thought, "hates children and wishes to destroy them. But I rather like children myself, and shall not harm them. Of course, I must return to my master, for he is a
Nursery
magician, and would
rhymes
seek me out
and
and kill me.
pastime
But I
stories
can
for
deceive him about this
children
matter easily
and
enough."
kids of all
When the
ages.
butterfly flew in at the door of the mandarin's laundry, he asked eagerly, "Well, did you meet a child?" "I did," replied the butterfly calmly. "It was a pretty golden-haired girl, but now 'tis a grunting pig." "Good, good, good," cried the mandarin, dancing joyfully about the room. "You shall have molasses for your supper, and tomorrow you must change 2 children into pigs." The butterfly did not reply, but ate the molasses in silence. Having no soul, it had no conscience, and having no conscience, it was able to lie to the mandarin with great readiness and a certain amount of enjoyment. Next morning, by the mandarin's command, the butterfly dipped its legs in the mixture and flew away in search of children. When it came to the edge of the town, it noticed a pig in a sty, and alighting upon the
Nursery
rail of the
rhymes
sty, it
and
looked down at the creature
pastime
and thought,
stories for
"If I could change a
children
child into a pig
and
by touching
kids
it with the
of all
magic compound,
ages.
what could I change a pig into, I wonder?" Being curious to determine this fine point in sorcery, the butterfly fluttered down and touched its front feet to the pig's nose. Instantly the animal disappeared, and in its place was a shock-headed, dirty-looking boy, which sprang from the sty and ran down the road, uttering loud whoops. "That's funny," said the butterfly to itself. "The mandarin would be very angry with me if he knew of this, for I have liberated one more of the creatures that bother him." It fluttered along after the boy, who had paused to throw stones at a cat. But Pussy escaped by running up a tree where thick branches protected her from the stones. Then the boy discovered a newly planted garden and trampled upon the beds until the seeds were scattered far and wide, and the garden was ruined. Next he caught up a switch and struck with it a
Nursery
young cat that
rhymes
stood quietly
and
grazing in the field.
pastime
The poor
stories
creature ran away
for
with hideous
children
bleats,
and
the boy
kids
laughed
of
and
all
followed after it,
ages.
striking the frightened animal again and again. "Really," thought the butterfly, "I do not wonder the mandarin hates children, if they are all so cruel and wicked as this one." The calf having escaped him, the boy came back to the road, where he met 2 little girls on their way to school. One of them had a red apple in her hand, and the boy snatched it away and began eating it. The little girl commenced to cry, but her companion, more brave and sturdy, cried out, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, you nasty boy!" At this, the boy reached out and slapped her pretty face. whereupon she also began to sob. Although possessed of neither soul nor conscience, the butterfly had a very tender heart, and now decided it could endure this boy no longer. If I permitted him to exist, it reflected, I should never
Nursery
forgive myself,
rhymes
for the monster
and
would do nothing but
pastime
evil from morning
stories
till night.
for children
So it flew
and
directly into
kids
his
of
face
all
and touched his
ages.
forehead with its sticky front feet. The next instant the boy had disappeared, but a grunting pig ran swiftly up the road in the direction of its sty. The butterfly gave a sigh of relief. This time, I have indeed used the mandarin's magic upon a child, it whispered as it floated lazily upon the light breeze. But since the child was originally a pig, I do not think I have any cause to reproach myself. The little girls were sweet and gentle, and I would not injure them to save my life. But were all boys like this transformed pig, I should not hesitate to carry out the mandarin's orders. Then it flew into a rosebush, where it remained comfortably until evening. At sundown, it returned to its master. "Have you changed 2 of them into pigs?" he asked at once. "I have," replied the butterfly.
Nursery
One was a pretty
rhymes
black-eyed
and
baby, and the other
pastime
a
stories
freckle-faced,
for
red-haired, barefooted
children
new boy.
and kids of all
Good,
ages.
good, screamed the mandarin in an ecstasy of delight. "Those are the ones who torment me the most. Change every new boy you meet into a pig." "Very well," answered the butterfly quietly, and ate its supper of molasses. Several days were passed by the butterfly in the same manner. It fluttered aimlessly about the flower gardens while the sun shone, and returned at night to the mandarin with false tales of turning children into swine. Sometimes it would be 1 child which was transformed, sometimes 2, and occasionally 3, but the mandarin always greeted the butterfly's report with intense delight, and gave him molasses for supper. One evening, however, the butterfly thought it might be well to vary the report, so that the mandarin might not grow suspicious. And when its master asked what child had been changed into a pig that day, the lying creature answered, "It was a
Nursery
Chinese boy,
rhymes
and when I touched
and
him, he became a
pastime
black
stories for
This
children
angered the mandarin,
and kids
who was in
of
an
all
especially cross
ages.
mood. He spitefully snapped the butterfly with his finger, and nearly broke its beautiful wing, for he forgot that Chinese boys had once mocked him, and only remembered his hatred for American boys. The butterfly became very indignant at this abuse from the mandarin. It refused to eat its molasses, and sulked all the evening, for it had grown to hate the mandarin almost as much as the mandarin hated children. When morning came, it was still trembling with indignation, but the mandarin cried out, "Make haste, miserable slave, for today you must change 4 children into pigs, to make up for yesterday." The butterfly did not reply. His little black eyes were sparkling wickedly.
The Wedding of Mrs. Fox by the Brothers Grimm. The first story. There was once upon a time an old fox with 9 tails who believed that his wife was not faithful to him and wished to put her to the test. He stretched himself out under the bench, did not move a limb, and behaved as if he were stone dead. Mrs. Fox went up to her room, shut herself in, and her maid, Miss Cat, sat by the fire and did the cooking. When it became known that the old fox was dead, suitors presented themselves. The maid heard someone standing at the house door knocking. She went and opened it, and it was a young fox who said, "What may you be about, Miss Cat? Do you sleep or do you wake?" She answered, "I am not sleeping, I am waking. Would you know what I am making? I am boiling warm beer with butter. Will you be my guest for supper?" "No, thank you, miss," said the fox. "What is Mrs. Fox doing?" The maid replied, "She is sitting in her room, moaning in her gloom, weeping her little eyes quite red, because old Mr. Fox is dead." "Do just tell her, miss, that a young fox is here who would like to woo her." "Certainly, young sir." The cat goes up the stairs, trip-trap. The door she knocks at, tap-tap-tap. "Mistress Fox, are you inside?" "Oh, yes, my little cat," she cried. "A wooer, he stands at the door out there." "What does he look like, my dear?" "Has he 9 as beautiful tails as the late Mr. Fox?" "Oh, no," answered the cat. "He has only 1." "Then I will not have him." This cat went downstairs and sent the wooer away. Soon afterwards there was another knock, and another fox was at the door who wished to woo Mrs. Fox. He had 2 tails, but he did not fare better than the first. After this, still more came, each with one tail more than the other, but they were all turned away, until at last one came who had 9 tails like old Mr. Fox. When the widow heard that, she said joyfully to the cat, "Now open the gates and doors all wide, and carry old Mr. Fox inside." But just as the wedding was going to be solemnized, old Mr. Fox stirred under the bench and cudgeled all the rabble and drove them and Mrs. Fox out of the house. The second story. When old Mr. Fox was dead, the wolf came as a suitor and knocked at the door, and the cat, who was servant to Mrs. Fox, opened it for him. The wolf greeted her and said, "Good day, Mrs. Cat of Carewit. How comes it that alone you sit? What are you making good?" The cat replied, "In milk I'm breaking bread so sweet. Will you be my guest and eat?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Cat," answered the wolf. "Is Mrs. Fox not at home?" The cat said, "She sits upstairs in her room, bewailing her sorrowful doom, bewailing her trouble so sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more." The wolf answered, "If she's in want of a husband now, then will it please her to step below?" The cat runs quickly up the stair and lets her tail fly here and there until she comes to the parlor door. With her 5 gold rings at the door, she knocks. "Are you within, good Mistress Fox? If you're in want of a husband now, then will it please you to step below?" Mrs. Fox answered, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has he a pointed mouth?" "No," answered the cat. "Then he won't do for me." When the wolf was gone came a dog, a stag, a hare, a bear, a lion, and all the beasts of the forest, one after the other. But one of the good qualities which old Mr. Fox had possessed was always lacking, and the cat had continually to send the suitors away. At length came a young fox. Then Mrs. Fox said, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has a little pointed mouth?" "Yes," said the cat, "he has." "Then let him come upstairs," said Mrs. Fox, and ordered the servant to prepare the wedding feast. "Sweep me the room as clean as you can. Up with the window fling out my old man. For many a fine fat mouse he brought, yet of his wife he never thought, but ate up every one he caught." Then the wedding was solemnized with young Mr. Fox, and there was much rejoicing and dancing, and if they have not left off, they are dancing still. The end of The Wedding of Mrs. Fox by the Brothers Grimm. Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, from 1001 Tales of the Arabian Nights. There once lived a poor tailor who had a son called Aladdin, a careless, idle boy who would do nothing but play ball all day long in the streets with little idle boys like himself. This so grieved the father that he died. Yet, in spite of his mother's tears and prayers, Aladdin did not mend his ways. One day, when he was playing in the streets as usual, a stranger asked him his age, and if he was not the son of Mustafa, the tailor. "I am, sir," replied Aladdin, "but he died a long while ago." On this, the stranger, who was a famous African magician, fell on his neck and kissed him, saying, "I am your uncle, and knew you from your likeness to my brother. Go to your mother and tell her I am coming." Aladdin ran home and told his mother of his newly found uncle. "Indeed, child," she said, "your father had a brother, but I always thought he was dead." However, she prepared supper and bade Aladdin seek his uncle, who came laden with wine and fruit. He presently fell down and kissed the place where Mustafa used to sit, bidding Aladdin's mother not to be surprised at not having seen him before, as he had been 40 years out of the country. He then turned to Aladdin and asked him his trade, at which the boy hung his head, while his mother burst into tears. On learning that Aladdin was idle and would learn no trade, he offered to take a shop for him and stock it with merchandise. Next day, he bought Aladdin a fine suit of clothes and took him all over the city, showing him the sights, and brought him home at nightfall to his mother, who was overjoyed to see her son so fine. The next day, the magician led Aladdin into some beautiful gardens at a long way outside the city gates. They sat down by a fountain, and the magician pulled a cake from his girdle, which he divided between them. Then they journeyed onward till they almost reached the mountains. Aladdin was so tired that he begged to go back, but the magician beguiled him with pleasant stories and led him on in spite of himself. At last they came to two mountains divided by a narrow valley. "We'll go no further," said the false uncle. "I will show you something wonderful. Only do you gather up sticks while I kindle a fire." When it was lit, the magician threw on it a powder he had about him, at the same time saying some magical words. The earth trembled a little and opened in front of them, disclosing a square, flat stone with a brass ring in the middle to raise it by. Aladdin tried to run away, but the magician caught him and gave him a blow that knocked him down. "What have I done, uncle?" he said piteously, whereupon the magician said more kindly, "Fear nothing, but obey me. Beneath this stone lies a treasure which is to be yours, and no one else may touch it, so you must do exactly as I tell you." At the word treasure, Aladdin forgot his fears and grasped the ring as he was told, saying the names of his father and grandfather. The stone came up quite easily, and some steps appeared. "Go down," said the magician. "At the foot of those steps you will find an open door leading into 3 large halls. Tuck up your gown and go through them without touching anything, or you will die instantly. These halls lead into a garden of fine fruit trees. Walk on until you come to a niche in the terrace where stands a lighted lamp. Pour out the oil it contains and bring it to me." He drew a ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, bidding him prosper. Aladdin found everything as the magician had said, gathered some fruit off the trees, and, having got the lamp, arrived at the mouth of the cave. The magician cried out in a great hurry, "Make haste and give me the lamp." This Aladdin refused to do until he was out of the cave. The magician flew into a terrible passion, and throwing some more powder onto the fire, he said something, and the stone rolled back into its place. The magician left Persia forever, which plainly showed that he was no uncle of Aladdin's, but a cunning magician who had read in his magic books of a wonderful lamp which would make him the most powerful man in the world. Though he alone knew where to find it, he could only receive it from the hand of another. He had picked out the foolish Aladdin for this purpose, intending to get the lamp and kill him afterward. For 2 days, Aladdin remained in the dark, crying and lamenting. At last, he clasped his hands in prayer, and in so doing rubbed the ring which the magician had forgotten to take from him. Immediately, an enormous and frightful genie rose out of the earth, saying, "What wouldst thou with me? I am the slave of the ring, and will obey thee in all things." Aladdin fearlessly replied, "Deliver me from this place," whereupon the earth opened, and he found himself outside. As soon as his eyes could bear the light, he went home, but fainted on the threshold. When he came to himself, he told his mother what had passed, and showed her the lamp and the fruits he had gathered in the garden, which were in reality precious stones. He then asked for some food. "Alas, child," she said, "I have nothing in the house, but I have spun a little cotton, and will go and sell it." Aladdin bade her keep her cotton, for he would sell the lamp instead. As it was very dirty, she began to rub it, that it might fetch a higher price. Instantly, a hideous genie appeared and asked what she would have. She fainted away, but Aladdin, snatching the lamp, said boldly, "Fetch me something to eat." The genie returned with a silver bowl, 12 silver plates containing rich meats, 2 silver cups, and 2 bottles of wine. Aladdin's mother, when she came to herself, said, "Whence comes this splendid feast?" "Ask naught but eat," replied Aladdin. So they sat at breakfast till it was dinner time, and Aladdin told his mother about the lamp. She begged him to sell it and have nothing to do with devils. "No," said Aladdin, "since chance hath made us aware of its virtues, we will use it, and the ring likewise, which I shall always wear on my finger." When they had eaten all the genie had brought, Aladdin sold one of the silver plates, and so on until none were left. He then had recourse to the genie, who gave him another set of plates, and thus they lived for many years. One day, Aladdin heard an order from the Sultan proclaiming that everyone was to stay at home and close his shutters while the princess, his daughter, went to and from the bath. Aladdin was seized by a desire to see her face, which was very difficult as she always went veiled. He hid himself behind the door of the bath, peeped through a chink. The princess lifted her veil as she went in and looked so beautiful that Aladdin fell in love with her at first sight. He went home so changed that his mother was frightened. He told her he loved the princess so deeply that he could not live without her and meant to ask her in marriage of her father. His mother, on hearing this, burst out laughing, but Aladdin at last prevailed upon her to go before the Sultan and carry his request. He fetched a napkin and laid in it the magic fruits from the enchanted garden, which sparkled and shone like the most beautiful jewels. She took these with her to please the Sultan and set out trusting in the land. The Grand Wazir and the Lords of Council had just gone in as she entered the hall and placed herself in front of the Sultan. He, however, took no notice of her. She went every day for a week and stood in the same place. When the council broke up on the 6th day, the Sultan said to his Wazir, "I see a certain woman in the audience chamber every day carrying something in a napkin. Call her next time, that I may find out what she wants." Next day, at a sign from the Wazir, she went up to the foot of the throne and remained kneeling till the Sultan said to her, "Rise, good woman, and tell me what you want." She hesitated, so the Sultan sent away all but the Wazir and bade her speak frankly, promising to forgive her beforehand for anything she might say. She then told him of her son's violent love for the princess. "I prayed him to forget her," she said, "but in vain. He threatened to do some desperate deed if I refused to go and ask your majesty for the hand of the princess. Now, I pray you to forgive not me alone, but my son Aladdin." The Sultan asked her kindly what she had in the napkin, whereupon she unfolded the jewels and presented them. He was thunderstruck, and turning to the Wazir said, "What sayest thou? Ought I not to bestow the princess on one who values her at such a price?" The Wazir, who wanted her for his own son, begged the Sultan to withhold her for 3 months, in the course of which he hoped his son would contrive to make him a richer present. The Sultan granted this and told Aladdin's mother that, though he consented to the marriage, she must not appear before him again for 3 months. Aladdin waited patiently for nearly 3 months, but after 2 elapsed, his mother, going into the city to buy oil, found everyone rejoicing and asked what was going on. "Do you not know," was the answer, "that the son of the Grand Wazir is to marry the Sultan's daughter tonight?" Breathless, she ran and told Aladdin, who was overwhelmed at first, but presently bethought him of the lamp. He rubbed it, and the genie appeared, saying, "What is thy will?" Aladdin replied, "The Sultan, as thou knowest, has broken his promise to me, and the Wazir's son is to have the princess. My command is that tonight you bring hither the bride and bridegroom." "Master, I obey," said the genie. Aladdin then went to his chamber where, sure enough, at midnight, the genie transported the bed containing the Wazir's son and the princess. "Take this new married man," he said, "and put him outside in the cold and return at daybreak." Whereupon the genie took the Wazir's son out of bed, leaving Aladdin with the princess. "Fear nothing," Aladdin said to her. "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm shall come to you." The princess was too frightened to speak, and passed the most miserable night of her life, while Aladdin lay down beside her and slept soundly. At the appointed hour, the genie fetched in the shivering bridegroom, laid him in his place, and transported the bed back to the palace. Presently, the Sultan came to wish his daughter good morning. The unhappy Wazir's son jumped up and hid himself, while the princess would not say a word, and was very sorrowful. The Sultan sent her mother to her, who said, "How comes it, child, that you will not speak to your father? What has happened?" The princess sighed deeply, and at last told her mother how, during the night, the bed had been carried to some strange house, and what had passed there. Her mother did not believe her in the least, and bade her rise and consider it an idle dream. The following night, exactly the same thing happened, and next morning, on the princess's refusal to speak, the Sultan threatened to cut off her head. She then confessed all, bidding him to ask the Wazir's son if it were not so. The Sultan told the wazir to ask his son, who owned the truth, adding that, dearly as he loved the princess, he had rather die than go through another such fearful night, and wished to be separated from her. His wish was granted, and there was an end to feasting and rejoicing. When the 3 months were over, Aladdin sent his mother to remind the Sultan of his promise. He stood in the same place as before, and the Sultan, who had forgotten Aladdin, at once remembered him and sent for her. On seeing her poverty, the Sultan felt less inclined than ever to keep his word, and asked his wazir's advice, who counseled him to set so high a value on the princess that no man living could come up to it. The Sultan then turned to Aladdin's mother, saying, "Good woman, a sultan must remember his promises, and I will remember mine, but your son must first send me 40 basins of gold brimful of jewels, carried by 40 black slaves, led by as many white ones, splendidly dressed. Tell him that I await his answer." The mother of Aladdin bowed low and went home, thinking all was lost. She gave Aladdin the message, adding, "He may wait long enough for your answer." "Not so long, mother, as you think," her son replied. "I would do a great deal more than that for the princess." He summoned the genie, and in a few moments the 8 slaves arrived and filled up the small house and garden. Aladdin made them set out to the palace, 2 and 2, followed by his mother. They were so richly dressed with such splendid jewels in their girdles that everyone crowded to see them and the basins of gold they carried on their heads. They entered the palace, and after kneeling before the Sultan, stood in a half circle around the throne with their arms crossed, while Aladdin's mother presented them to the Sultan. He hesitated no longer, but said, "Good woman, return and tell your son that I wait for him with open arms." She lost no time in telling Aladdin, bidding him make haste. But Aladdin first called the genie. "I want a scented bath," he said, "a richly embroidered habit, a horse surpassing the Sultan's, and 20 slaves to attend to me. Besides this, 6 slaves beautifully dressed to wait on my mother, and lastly 10,000 pieces of gold in 10 purses." No sooner said than done. Aladdin mounted his horse and passed through the streets, the slaves strewing gold as they went. Those who had played with him in his childhood knew him not, he had grown so handsome. When the Sultan saw him, he came down from his throne, embraced him, and led him into a hall where a feast was spread, intending to marry him to the princess that very day. But Aladdin refused, saying, "I must build a palace fit for her," and took his leave. Once more he said to the genie, "Build me a palace of the finest marble, set with jasper, agate, and other precious stones. In the middle you shall build me a large hall with a dome, its 4 walls of massy gold and silver, each having 6 windows, whose lattices, all except one, which is to be left unfinished, must be set with diamonds and rubies. There must be stables, and horses, and grooms, and slaves. Go and see about it." The palace was finished by the next day, and the genie carried him there and showed him all his orders, faithfully carried out, even to the laying of a velvet carpet from Aladdin's palace to the Sultan's. Aladdin's mother then dressed herself carefully and walked to the palace with her slaves, while he followed her on horseback. The Sultan sent musicians with trumpets and cymbals to meet them, so that the air resounded with music and cheers. She was taken to the princess, who saluted her and treated her with great honor. At night, the princess said goodbye to her father and set out on the carpet for Aladdin's palace with his mother at her side, and followed by the 100 slaves. She was charmed at the sight of Aladdin, who ran to receive her. "Princess," he said, "blame your beauty for my boldness if I have displeased you." She told him that after seeing him, she willingly obeyed her father in this matter. After the wedding had taken place, Aladdin led her into the hall where a feast was spread, and she supped with him, after which they danced till midnight. Next day, Aladdin invited the Sultan to see the palace. On entering the hall with the 24 windows with their rubies, diamonds, and emeralds, he cried, "It is a world's wonder. There is only one thing that surprises me. Was it by accident that one window was left unfinished?" "No, sir. By design," returned Aladdin. "I wished your majesty to have the glory of finishing this palace." The Sultan was pleased and sent for the best jewelers in the city. He showed them the unfinished window and bade them fit it up like the others. "Sir," replied their spokesman. "We cannot find jewels enough." The Sultan had stone fetched, which they soon used, but to no purpose, for in a month's time the work was not half done. Aladdin, knowing that their task was in vain, bade them undo their work and carry the jewels back, and the genie finished the window at his command. The Sultan was surprised to receive his jewels again and visit Aladdin, who showed him the window finished. The Sultan embraced him, the envious Wazir meanwhile hinting that it was the work of enchantment. Aladdin had won the hearts of the people by his gentle bearing. He was made captain of the Sultan's armies and won several battles for him, but remained modest and courteous as before, and lived thus in peace and content for several years. But far away in Africa, the magician remembered Aladdin, and by his magic arts discovered that Aladdin, instead of perishing miserably in the cave, had escaped and had married a princess with whom he was living in great honor and wealth. He knew that the poor tailor's son could only have accomplished this by means of the lamp, and traveled night and day until he reached the capital of China, bent on Aladdin's ruin. As he passed through the town, he heard people talking everywhere about a marvelous palace. "Forgive my ignorance," he asked. "What is this palace you speak of?" "Have you not heard of Prince Aladdin's palace?" was the reply. "The greatest wonder of the world? I will direct you if you have a mind to see it." The magician thanked him who spoke, and having seen the palace, knew that it had been raised by the genie of the lamp, and became half mad with rage. He determined to get hold of the lamp and again plunge Aladdin into the deepest poverty. Unluckily, Aladdin had gone a-hunting for 8 days, which gave the magician plenty of time. He bought a dozen copper lamps, put them into a basket, and went to the palace crying, "New lamps for old," followed by a jeering crowd. The princess, sitting in the hall of 24 windows, sent a slave to find out what the noise was about, who came back laughing so that the princess scolded her. "Madam," replied the slave, "who could help laughing to see an old fool offering to exchange fine new lamps for old ones?" Another slave, hearing this, said, "There is an old one on the cornice there which he can have." Now, this was the magic lamp which Aladdin had left there, as he could not take it out hunting with him. The princess, not knowing its value, laughingly bade the slave take it and make the exchange. She went and said to the magician, "Give me a new lamp for this." He snatched it and bade the slave take her choice amid the jeers of the crowd. Little he cared, but left off crying his lamps and went out of the city gates to a lonely place, where he remained until nightfall, when he pulled out the lamp and rubbed it. The genie appeared, and at the magician's command carried him together with the palace and the princess in it to a lonely place in Africa. Next morning, the Sultan looked out of the window towards Aladdin's palace and rubbed his eyes, for it was gone. He sent for the Wazir and asked what had become of the palace. The Wazir looked out too and was lost in astonishment. He again put it down to enchantment, and this time the Sultan believed him and sent 30 men on horseback to fetch Aladdin in chains. They met him riding home, bound him, and forced him to go with them on foot. People, however, who loved him followed armed to see that he came to no harm. He was carried before the Sultan, who ordered the executioner to cut off his head. The executioner made Aladdin kneel down, bandaged his eyes, and raised his scimitar to strike. At that instant, the Wazir, who saw that the crowd had forced their way into the courtyard and were scaling the walls to rescue Aladdin, called to the executioner to stay his hand. The people indeed looked so threatening that the Sultan gave way and ordered Aladdin to be unbound and pardoned him in the sight of the crowd. Aladdin now begged to know what he had done. "False wretch," said the Sultan, "come thither," and showed him from the window the place where his palace had stood. Aladdin was so amazed that he could not say a word. "Where is my palace and my daughter?" demanded the Sultan. "For the first, I am not so deeply concerned, but my daughter I must have, and you must find her or lose your head." Aladdin begged for 40 days in which to find her, promising if he failed to return and suffer death at the Sultan's pleasure. His prayer was granted, and he went forth sadly from the Sultan's presence. For 3 days he wandered about like a madman, asking everyone what had become of his palace, but they only laughed and pitied him. He came to the banks of a river, and knelt down to say his prayers before throwing himself in. In so doing, he rubbed the magic ring he still wore. The genie, he had seen in the cave appeared and asked his will. "Save my life, genie," said Aladdin. "Bring my palace back." "That is not in my power," said the genie. "I am only the slave of the ring. You must ask him of the lamp." "Even so," said Aladdin, "but thou canst take me to the palace and set me down under my dear wife's window." He at once found himself in Africa, under the window of the princess, and fell asleep out of sheer weariness. He was awakened by the singing of the birds, and his heart was lighter. He saw plainly that all his misfortunes were owing to the loss of the lamp, and vainly wondered who had robbed him of it. That morning, the princess rose earlier than she had done since she had been carried into Africa by the magician, whose company she was forced to endure once a day. She, however, treated him so harshly that he dared not live there altogether. As she was dressing, one of her women looked out and saw Aladdin. The princess ran and opened the window, and at the noise she made, Aladdin looked up. She called to him to come to her, and great was the joy of these lovers at seeing each other again. After he had kissed her, Aladdin said, "I beg of you, princess, in God's name, before we speak of anything else for your own sake and mine, tell me, what has become of an old lamp I left on the cornice in the hall of 24 windows when I went hunting?" "Alas," she said, "I am the innocent cause of our sorrows," and told him of the exchange of the lamp. "Now I know," cried Aladdin, "that we have to thank the African magician for this. Where is the lamp?" "He carries it about with him," said the princess. "I know, for he pulled it out of his breast to show me. He wishes me to break my faith with you and marry him, saying that you are beheaded by my father's command. He is forever speaking ill of you, but I only reply by my tears. If I persist, I doubt not that he will use violence." Aladdin comforted her and left her for a while. He changed clothes with the first person he met in the town, and having bought a certain powder, returned to the princess, who led him in by a little sideboard. "Put on your most beautiful dress," he said to her, "and receive the magician with smiles, leading him to believe that you have forgotten me. Invite him to sup with you, and say you wish to taste the wine of his country. He will go for some, and while he is gone, I will tell you what to do." She listened carefully to Aladdin, and when he left, she arrayed herself gaily for the first time since she left China. She put on a girdle and headdress of diamonds, and seeing in a glass that she was more beautiful than ever, received the magician, saying to his great amazement, "I have made up my mind that Aladdin is dead, and that all my tears will not bring him back to me, so I am resolved to mourn no more, and have therefore invited you to sup with me. But I am tired of the wines of China, and would fain taste those of Africa." The magician flew to his cellar, and the princess put the powder Aladdin had given her in her cup. When he returned, she asked him to drink her health in the wine of Africa, handing him her cup in exchange for his, as a sign she was reconciled to him. Before drinking, the magician made her a speech in praise of her beauty, but the princess cut him short, saying, "Let us drink first, and you shall say what you will afterward." She set her cup to her lips and kept it there, while the magician drained his to the dregs and fell back lifeless. The princess then opened the door to Aladdin and flung her arms around his neck, but Aladdin put her away, bidding her leave him as he had more to do. Then he went to the dead magician, took the lamp out of his vest, and bade the genie carry the palace and all in it back to China. This was done, and the princess in her chamber only felt 2 little shocks, and little thought she was at home again. The sultan, who was sitting in his closet, mourning for his lost daughter, happened to look up and rubbed his eyes, for there stood the palace as before. He hastened thither, and Aladdin received him in the hall of the 24 windows, with the princess at his side. Aladdin told him what had happened, and showed him the dead body of the magician, that he might believe. A 10 days' feast was proclaimed, and it seemed as if Aladdin might now live the rest of his life in peace. But it was not to be. The African magician had a younger brother who was, if possible, more wicked and more cunning than himself. He traveled to China to avenge his brother's death, and went to visit a pious woman called Fatima, thinking she might be of use to him. He entered her cell and clapped a dagger to her breast, telling her to rise and do his bidding on pain of death. He changed clothes with her, colored his face like hers, put on her veil, and murdered her, that she might tell no tale. Then he went toward the palace of Aladdin, and all the people, thinking he was the holy woman, gathered round him, kissing his hands and begging his blessing. When he got to the palace, there was such a noise going on round him that the princess bade her slave look out of the window and ask what was the matter. The slave said it was the Holy Woman, curing people by her touch of their ailments, whereupon the princess, who had long desired to see Fatima, sent for her. On coming to the princess, the magician offered up a prayer for her health and prosperity. When he had done, the princess made him sit by her and begged him to stay with her always. The false Fatima, who wished for nothing better, consented, but kept his veil down for fear of discovery. The princess showed him the hall and asked him what he thought of it. "It is truly beautiful," said the false Fatima. "In my mind, it wants but one thing." "And what is that?" said the princess. "If only a roc's egg," replied he, "were hung up from the middle of this dome, it would be the wonder of the world." After this, the princess could think of nothing but the roc's egg.
PewDiePie Kids. Nursery rhymes and pastime stories for children and kids of all ages.
King Grizzlybeard by the Brothers Grimm. A great king of a land far away in the east had a daughter who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty and conceited that none of the princes who came to ask her in marriage was good enough for her, and she only made sport of them. Once upon a time, the king held a great feast and asked thither all her suitors, and they all sat in a row, ranged according to their rank. Kings and princes and dukes and earls and counts and barons and knights. Then the princess came in, and as she passed by them, she had something spiteful to say to every one. The first was, "Too fat." "He's as round as a tub," said she. The next was, "Too
Nursery
tall."
rhymes
"What a
and
maypole,"
pastime
said she.
stories
The next
for
was, "Too short."
children and
"What a
kids
dumpling,"
of all
said she.
ages.
The fourth was too pale, and she called him Wallface. The fifth was too red, so she called him Coxcomb. The sixth was not straight enough, so she said he was like a green stick that had been laid to dry over a baker's oven. And thus she had some joke to crack upon every one. But she laughed more than all at a good king who was there. "Look at him," said she. "His beard is like an old mop. He shall be called Grizzlybeard." So the king got the nickname of Grizzlybeard. But the old king was very angry when he saw how his daughter behaved and how she ill-treated all his guests, and he vowed that, willing or unwilling, she should marry the first man, be he prince or beggar, that came to the door. 2 days after, there came by a traveling fiddler who began to play under the widow and beg alms. And when
Nursery
the king heard it, he
rhymes
said, "Let him
and
come in."
pastime
So they brought in a
stories
dirty-looking
for
fellow,
children
and when he had sung
and
before the
kids
king and
of
the
all
princess, he
ages.
begged a boon. Then the king said, "You have sung so well that I will give you my daughter for your wife." The princess begged and prayed, but the king said, "I have sworn to give you to the first comer, and I will keep my word." So words and tears were of no avail. The parson was sent for, and she was married to the fiddler. When this was over, the king said, "Now, get ready to go. You must not stay here. You must travel on with your husband." Then the fiddler went his way and took her with him, and they soon came to a great wood. "Pray," said she, "whose is this wood?" "It belongs to King Grizzlybeard," answered he. "Hadst thou taken him, all had been thine." "Ah, unlucky wretch that I am," sighed she. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Next,
Nursery
they came to some
rhymes
fine meadows.
and pastime
"Whose are these
stories
beautiful
for
green
children
meadows?" said she.
and kids of
"They
all
belong to King
ages.
Grizzlybeard. Hadst thou taken him, they had all been thine." "Ah, unlucky wretch that I am," said she. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Then they came to a great city. "Whose is this noble city?" said she. "It belongs to King Grizzlybeard. Hadst thou taken him, it had all been thine." "Ah, wretch that I am," sighed she. "Why did I not marry King Grizzlybeard?" "That is no business of mine," said the fiddler. "Why should you wish for another husband? Am I not good enough for you?" At last they came to a small cottage. "What a paltry place," said she. "To whom does that little dirty hole belong?" Then the fiddler said, "That is your and my house, where we are to live."
Nursery rhymes
"Where are your
and
servants?" cried
pastime
she.
stories
"What do we
for
want with
children
servants?" said he.
and kids
"You must
of
do for
all
yourself
ages.
whatever is to be done. Now make the fire and put on water and cook my supper, for I am very tired." But the princess knew nothing of making fires and cooking, and the fiddler was forced to help her. When they had eaten a very scanty meal, they went to bed, but the fiddler called her up very early in the morning to clean the house. Thus they lived for 2 days, and when they had eaten up all there was in the cottage, the man said, "Wife, we can't go on thus spending money and earning nothing. You must learn to weave baskets." Then he went out and cut willows and brought them home, and she began to weave, but it made her fingers very sore. "I see this work won't do," said he. "Try and spin. Perhaps you will do that better." So she sat down and tried to spin, but the threads cut her tender fingers till the blood ran.
Nursery
"See
rhymes
now," said the
and
fiddler, "you are good for
pastime
nothing.
stories
You can do no
for
work.
children
What a bargain I have
and
got.
kids of all
However,
ages.
I'll try and set up a trade in pots and pans, and you shall stand in the market and sell them." "Alas," sighed she, "if any of my father's court should pass by and see me standing in the market, how they will laugh at me." But her husband did not care for that, and said she must work, if she did not wish to die of hunger. At first, the trade went well, for many people, seeing such a beautiful woman, went to buy her wares, and paid their money without thinking of taking away the goods. They lived on this as long as it lasted, and then her husband bought a fresh lot of ware, and she sat herself down with it in the corner of the market. But a drunken soldier soon came by, and rode his horse against her stall, and broke all her goods into 1,000 pieces. Then she began to cry, and knew not what to do. "Ah, what will become of me?"
Nursery
said
rhymes
she. "What
and
will my husband
pastime
say?"
stories
So she ran
for
home
children
and told him all.
and kids of
"Who
all
would have thought
ages.
you would have been so silly," said he, "as to put an earthenware stall in the corner of the market where everybody passes? But let us have no more crying. I see you're not fit for this sort of work." So I have been to the king's palace and asked if they did not want a kitchen maid, and they say they will take you, and there you will have plenty to eat. Thus the princess became a kitchen maid and helped the cook to do all the dirtiest work. But she was allowed to carry home some of the meat that was left, and on this they lived. She had not been there long before she heard that the king's eldest son was passing by, going to be married, and she went to one of the windows and looked out. Everything was ready, and all the pomp and brightness of the court was there. Then she bitterly grieved for the pride and folly which had brought her so low. And the servants gave her some of the rich meats, which she put into her basket
Nursery
to take home.
rhymes and
All on a
pastime
sudden,
stories
as she was
for
going out,
children
in came the
and
king's son in
kids
golden
of all
clothes,
ages.
and when he saw a beautiful woman at the door, he took her by the hand and said she should be his partner in the dance. But she trembled for fear, for she saw that it was King Grizzlybeard who was making sport of her. However, he kept fast hold and held her in, and the cover of the basket came off so that the meats in it fell about. Then everybody laughed and jeered at her, and she was so abashed that she wished herself 1,000 feet deep in the earth. She sprang to the door to run away, but on the steps King Grizzlybeard overtook her and brought her back and said, "Fear me not. I am the fiddler who has lived with you in the hut. I brought you there because I really loved you. I am also the soldier that overset your stall. I have done all this only to cure you of your silly pride, and to
Nursery
show you the
rhymes
folly of your
and
ill treatment of
pastime
me.
stories for
Now all is
children
over.
and
You
kids
have learnt
of all
wisdom,
ages."
and it is time to hold our marriage feast. Then the chamberlains came and brought her the most beautiful robes, and her father and his whole court were there already, and welcomed her home on her marriage. Joy was in every face and every heart. The feast was great. Catskin by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a king whose queen had hair of the purest gold and was so beautiful that her match was not to be met with on the whole face of the earth. But this beautiful queen fell ill, and when she felt that her end drew near, she called the king to her and said, "Promise me that you will never marry again unless you meet with a wife who is as beautiful as I am and who has golden hair like mine." Then, when the king in his grief promised all she asked, she shut her eyes and died. But the king was not to be comforted, and for a long time never thought of taking another wife. At last, however, his wise men said, "This will not do. The king must marry again, that we may have a queen." So messengers were sent far and wide to seek for a bride as beautiful as the late queen. But there was no princess in the world so beautiful, and if there had been, still there was not one to be found who had golden hair. So the messengers came home, and had all the trouble for nothing. Now the king had a daughter who was just as beautiful as her mother, and had the same golden hair. And when she was grown up, the king looked at her and saw that she was just like this late queen. Then he said to his courtiers, "May I not marry my daughter? She is the very image of my dead wife. Unless I have her, I shall not find any bride upon the whole earth, and you say there must be a queen." When the courtiers heard this, they were shocked and said, "Heaven forbid that a father should marry his daughter. Out of so great a sin no good could come." And his daughter was also shocked, but hoped the king would soon give up such thoughts. So she said to him, "Before I marry anyone, I must have 3 dresses. One must be of gold like the sun, another must be of shining silver like the moon, and a third must be dazzling as the stars. Besides this, I want a mantle of 1,000 different kinds of fur put together, to which every beast in the kingdom must give a part of his skin." And thus she thought he would think of the matter no more. But the king made the most skillful workmen in his kingdom weave the 3 dresses, one golden like the sun, another silvery like the moon, and a third sparkling like the stars. And his hunters were told to hunt out all the beasts in his kingdom, and to take the finest fur out of their skins, and thus a mantle of 1,000 furs was made. When all were ready, the king sent them to her. But she got up in the night, when all were asleep, and took 3 of her trinkets, a golden ring, a golden necklace, and a golden brooch, and packed the 3 dresses of the sun, the moon, and the stars up in a nutshell, and wrapped herself up in the mantle made of all sorts of fur, and besmeared her face and hands with soot. Then she threw herself upon heaven for help in her need, and went away and journeyed on the whole night, till at last she came to a large wood. And as she was very tired, she sat herself down in the hollow of a tree and soon fell asleep. And there she slept on till it was midday. Now as the king to whom the wood belonged was hunting in it, his dogs came to the tree and began to snuff about and run round and bark. "Look sharp," said the king to the huntsman, "and see what sort of game lies there." And the huntsman went to the tree, and when they came back again said, "In the hollow tree there lies a most wonderful beast, such as we never saw before. Its skin seems to be of 1,000 kinds of fur, but there it lies fast asleep." "See," said the king, "if you can catch it alive, and we will take it with us." So the huntsman took it up, and the maiden awoke and was greatly frightened, and said, "I am a poor child that has neither father nor mother left. Have pity on me, and take me with you." Then they said, "Yes, Miss Catskin, you will do for the kitchen. You can sweep up the ashes and do things of that sort." So they put her into the coach and took her home to the king's palace. Then they showed her a little corner under the staircase where no light of day ever peeped in, and said, "Catskin, you may lie and sleep there." And she was sent into the kitchen and made to fetch wood and water, to blow the fire, pluck the poultry, pick the herbs, sift the ashes, and do all the dirty work. Thus Catskin lived for a long time very sorrowfully. "Oh, pretty princess," thought she, "what will now become of thee?" But it happened one day that a feast was to be held at the king's castle. So she said to the cook, "May I go up a little while and see what is going on? I will take care and stand behind the door." And the cook said, "Yes, you may go, but be back again in half an hour's time to rake out the ashes." Then she took her little lamp and went into her cabin, and took off the fur skin, and washed the soot from off her face and hands, so that her beauty shone forth like the sun from behind the clouds. She next opened her nutshell, and brought out of it the dress that shone like the sun, and so went to the feast. Everybody made way for her, for nobody knew her, and they thought she could be no less than a king's daughter. But the king came up to her, and held out his hand and danced with her, and he thought in his heart, "I never saw anyone half so beautiful." When the dance was at an end, she curtsied, and when the king looked round for her, she was gone. No one knew whither. The guards that stood at the castle gate were called in, but they had seen no one. The truth was that she had run into her little cabin, pulled off her dress, blackened her face and hands, put on the fur-skin cloak, and was Catskin again. When she went into the kitchen to her work and began to rake the ashes, the cook said, "Let that alone till the morning, and heat the king's soup. I should like to run up now and give a peep, but take care you don't let a hair fall into it, or you will run a chance of never eating again." As soon as the cook went away, Catskin heated the king's soup and toasted a slice of bread first as nicely as ever she could. And when it was ready, she went and looked in the cabin for her little golden ring and put it into the dish in which the soup was. When the dance was over, the king ordered his soup to be brought in, and it pleased him so well that he thought he had never tasted any so good before. At the bottom, he saw a gold ring lying, and as he could not make out how it had got there, he ordered it to be sent for. The cook was frightened when he heard the order and said to Catskin, "You must have let a hair fall into the soup. If it be so, you will have a good beating." Then he went before the king, and he asked him who had cooked the soup. "I did," answered the cook. But the king said, "That is not true. It was better done than you could do it." Then he answered, "To tell the truth, I did not cook it, but Catskin did." "Then let Catskin come," said the king. And when she came, he said to her, "Who are you?" "I am a poor child," said she, "that has lost both father and mother." "How came you into my palace?" asked he. "I am good for nothing," said she, "but to be a scullion girl, and to have boots and shoes thrown at my head." "But how did you get the ring that was in the soup?" asked the king. Then she would not own that she knew anything about the ring. So the king sent her away again about her business. After a time there was another feast, and Catskin asked the cook to let her go up and eat as before. "Yes," said he, "but come again in half an hour and cook the king the soup that he likes so much." Then she ran to her little cabin, washed herself quickly, and took her dress out, which was silvery as the moon, and put it on. And when she went in looking like a king's daughter, the king went up to her and rejoiced at seeing her again. And when the dance began, he danced with her. After the dance was at an end, she managed to slip out so slyly that the king did not see where she was gone. But she sprang into her little cabin and made herself into Catskin again and went into the kitchen to cook the soup. While the cook was above stairs, she got the golden necklace and dropped it into the soup. Then it was brought to the king, who ate it, and it pleased him as well as before, so he sent for the cook, who was again forced to tell him that Catskin had cooked it. Catskin was brought again before the king, but she still told him that she was only fit to have boots and shoes thrown at her head. But when the king had ordered the feast to be got ready for the third time, it happened just the same as before. "You must be a witch, Catskin," said the cook, "for you always put something into your soup so that it pleases the king better than mine." However, he let her go up as before. Then she put on her dress, which sparkled like the stars, and went into the ballroom in it. And the king danced with her again, and thought she had never looked so beautiful as she did then. So whilst he was dancing with her, he put a gold ring on her finger without her seeing it, and ordered that the dance should be kept up a long time. When it was at an end, he would have held her fast by the hand, but she slipped away and sprang so quickly through the crowd that he lost sight of her. And she ran as fast as she could into her little cabin under the stairs. But this time she kept away too long, and stayed beyond the half hour, so she had not time to take off her fine dress, and threw her fur mantle over it, and in her haste did not blacken herself all over with soot, but left one of her fingers white. Then she ran into the kitchen and cooked the king's soup. And as soon as the cook was gone, she put the golden brooch into the dish. When the king got to the bottom, he ordered Catskin to be called once more, and soon saw the white finger and the ring that he had put on it whilst they were dancing. So he seized her hand and kept fast hold of it, and when she wanted to loose herself and spring away, the fur cloak fell off a little on one side, and the starry dress sparkled underneath it. Then he got hold of the fur and tore it off, and her golden hair and beautiful form was seen, and she could no longer hide herself. So she washed the soot and ashes from her face, and showed herself to be the most beautiful princess upon the face of the earth. But the king The King of the Golden Mountain by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a merchant who had only one child, a son that was very young and barely able to run alone. He had two richly laden ships then making a voyage upon the seas, in which he had embarked all his wealth in the hope of making great gains, when the news came that both were lost. Thus, from being a rich man, he became all at once so very poor that nothing was left to him but one small plot of land, and there he often went in an evening to take his walk and ease his mind of a little of his trouble. One day, as he was roaming along in a brown study, thinking with no great comfort on what he had been and what he now was and was like to be, all of a sudden there stood before him a little, rough-looking black dwarf. "Prithee, friend, why so sorrowful?" said he to the merchant. "What is it you take so deeply to heart? If you would do me any good, I would willingly tell you," said the merchant. "Who knows but I may," said the little man. "Tell me what ails you, and perhaps you will find I may be of some use." Then the merchant told him how all his wealth was gone to the bottom of the sea, and now he had nothing left but that little plot of land. "Oh, trouble not yourself about that," said the dwarf. "Only undertake to bring me here 12 years hence. Whatever meets you first on your going home, and I will give you as much as you please." The merchant thought this was no great thing to ask, that it would most likely be his dog or his cat, or something of that sort, but forgot his little boy Heimlich. So he agreed to the bargain, and signed and sealed the bond to do what was asked of him. But as he drew near home, his little boy was so glad to see him that he crept behind him and laid fast hold of his legs and looked up in his face and laughed. Then the father started, trembling with fear and horror, and saw what it was that he had bound himself to do. But as no gold was come, he made himself easy by thinking that it was only a joke that the dwarf was playing him, that at any rate when the money came, he should see the bearer and would not take it in. About a month afterwards, he went upstairs into a lumber room to look for some old iron, that he might sell it and raise a little money. And there, instead of his iron, he saw a large pile of gold lying on the floor. At the sight of this he was overjoyed, and forgetting all about his son, went into trade again and became a richer merchant than before. Meantime, little Heinel grew up, and as the end of the 12 years drew near, the merchant began to call to mind his bond, and became very sad and thoughtful, so that care and sorrow were written upon his face. The boy one day asked what was the matter, but his father would not tell him for some time. At last, however, he said that he had, without knowing it, sold him for gold to a little ugly-looking black dwarf, and that the 12 years were coming round when he must keep his word. Then Heinel said, "Father, give yourself very little trouble about that. I shall be too much for the little man." When the time came, the father and son went out together to the place agreed upon, and the son drew a circle on the ground and set himself and his father in the middle of it. The little black dwarf soon came and walked round and round about the circle, but could not find any way to get in, and he either could not or dared not jump over it. At last the boy said to him, "Have you anything to say to us, my friend, or what do you want?" Now, Heinel had found a friend in a good fairy that was fond of him, and had told him what to do, for this fairy knew what good luck was in store for him. "Have you brought me what you said you would?" said the dwarf to the merchant. The old man held his tongue, but Heinel said again, "What do you want here?" The dwarf said, "I come to talk with your father, not with you." "You have cheated and taken in my father," said the son. "Pray, give him up his bond at once." "Fair and softly," said the little old man. "Right is right. I have paid my money, and your father has had it and spent it. So be so good as to let me have what I paid it for." "You must have my consent to that first," said Heinel, "so please to step in here and let us talk it over." The old man grinned and showed his teeth, as if he should have been very glad to get into the circle if he could. Then at last, after a long talk, they came to terms. Heinel agreed that his father must give him up, and that so far the dwarf should have his way. But on the other hand, the fairy had told Heinel what fortune was in store for him if he followed his own course, and he did not choose to be given up to his humpbacked friend, who seemed so anxious for his company. So, to make a sort of drawn battle of the matter, it was settled that Heinel should be put into an open boat that lay on the seashore hard by, that the father should push him off with his own hand, and that he should thus be set adrift and left to the bad or good luck of wind and weather. Then he took leave of his father and set himself in the boat. Before it got far off, a wave struck it, and it fell with one side low in the water, so that the merchant thought that poor Heino was lost, and went home very sorrowful, while the dwarf went his way, thinking that, at any rate, he had had his revenge. The boat, however, did not sink, for the good fairy took care of her friend, and soon raised the boat up again, and it went safely on. The young man sat safe within, till at length it ran ashore upon an unknown land. As he jumped upon the shore, he saw before him a beautiful castle, but empty and dreary within, for it was enchanted. Here, said he to himself, must I find the prize the good fairy told me of. So he once more searched the whole palace through, till at last he found a white snake lying coiled up on its cushion in one of the chambers. Now, the white snake was an enchanted princess, and she was very glad to see him, and said, "Are you at last come to set me free? 12 long years have I waited here for the fairy to bring you hither, as she promised, for you alone can save me. This night 12 men will come. Their faces will be black, and they will be dressed in chain armor. They will ask what you do here, but give no answer, and let them do what they will. Beat, whip, pinch, prick, or torment you. Bear all. Only speak not a word, and at 12 o'clock they must go away. The second night 12 others will come, and the third night 24, who will even cut off your head. But at the 12th hour of that night their power is gone, and I shall be free, and will come and bring you the water of life, and will wash you with it, and bring you back to life and health." And all came to pass as she had said. Heino bore all and spoke not a word. And the third night the princess came and fell on his neck and kissed him. Joy and gladness burst forth through the castle. The wedding was celebrated, and he was crowned king of the Golden Mountain. They lived together very happily, and the queen had a son. And thus 8 years had passed over their heads, when the king thought of his father, and he began to long to see him once again. But the queen was against his going, and said, "I know well that misfortunes will come upon us if you go." However, he gave her no rest till she agreed. At his going away, she gave him a wishing ring and said, "Take this ring and put it on your finger. Whatever you wish, it will bring you. Only promise never to make use of it to bring me hence to your father's house." Then he said he would do what she asked, and put the ring on his finger, and wished himself near the town where his father lived. Heino found himself at the gates in a moment, but the guards would not let him go in because he was so strangely clad. So he went up to a neighboring hill where a shepherd dwelt, and borrowed his old frock, and thus passed unknown into the town. When he came to his father's house, he said he was his son. But the merchant would not believe him, and said he had had but one son, his poor Heino, who he knew was long since dead, and as he was only dressed like a poor shepherd, he would not even give him anything to eat. The king, however, still vowed that he was his son, and said, "Is there no mark by which you would know me if I am really your son?" "Yes," said his mother, "our Heino had a mark like a raspberry on his right arm." Then he showed them the mark, and they knew that what he had said was true. He next told them how he was king of the Golden Mountain, and was married to a princess, and had a son 7 years old. But the merchant said, "That can never be true. He must be a fine king truly who travels about in a shepherd's frock." At this the son was vexed, and forgetting his word, turned his ring, and wished for his queen and son. In an instant they stood before him, but the queen wept, and said he had broken his word, and bad luck would follow. He did all he could to soothe her, and she at last seemed to be appeased. But she was not so, in truth, and was only thinking how she should punish him. One day he took her to walk with him out of the town, and showed her the spot where the boat was set adrift upon the wide waters. Then he sat himself down and said, "I am very much tired. Sit by me. I will rest my head in your lap and sleep a while." As soon as he had fallen asleep, however, she drew the ring from his finger, and crept softly away, and wished herself and her son at home in their kingdom. And when he awoke, he found himself alone, and saw that the ring was gone from his finger. "I can never go back to my father's house," said he. "They would say I am a sorcerer. I will journey forth into the world till I come again to my kingdom." So saying, he set out, and travelled till he came to a hill where 3 giants were sharing their father's goods. And as they saw him pass, they cried out and said, "Little men have sharp wits. He shall part the goods between us." Now there was a sword that cut off an enemy's head whenever the wearer gave the words, "Heads off," a cloak that made the owner invisible or gave him any form he pleased, and a pair of boots that carried the wearer wherever he wished. Hino said they must first let him try these wonderful things, then he might know how to set a value upon them. Then they gave him the cloak, and he wished himself a fly, and in a moment he was a fly. "The cloak is very well," said he. "Now give me the sword." "No," said they, "not unless you undertake not to say, 'Heads off,' for if you do, we are all dead men." So they gave it to him, charging him to try it on a tree. He next asked for boots also, and the moment he had all three in his power, he wished himself at the Golden Mountain, and there he was at once. So the giants were left behind, with no goods to share or quarrel about. As Hino came near his castle, he heard the sound of merry music, and the people around him told him that his queen was about to marry another husband. Then he threw his cloak around him and passed through the castle hall and placed himself by the side of the queen where no one saw him. But when anything to eat was put upon her plate, he took it away and ate it himself. And when a glass of wine was handed to her, he took it and drank it. And thus, though he kept on giving her meat and drink, her plate and cup were always empty. Upon this, fear and remorse came over her. She went into her own chamber alone and sat there weeping, and he followed her there. "Alas," said she to herself, "was I not once set free? Why then does this enchantment still seem to bind me?" "False and fickle one," said he, "one indeed came who set thee free, and he is now near thee again. But how have you used him? Ought he to have had such treatment from thee?" Yet he went out and sent away the company, and said the wedding was at an end, for that he was come back to the kingdom. But the princes, peers, and great men mocked him. However,
nursery rhymes and pastime stories for children and kids of all ages.
The History of Jack the Giant Killer by Old Chapbook. In the reign of the famous King Arthur, there lived in Cornwall a lad named Jack, who was a boy of a bold temper and took delight in hearing or reading of conjurers, giants, and fairies, and used to listen eagerly to the deeds of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. In those days, there lived on St. Michael's Mount off Cornwall a huge giant, 18 feet high and 9 feet round. His fierce and savage looks were the terror of all who beheld him. He dwelt in a gloomy cavern on top of the mountain, and used to wade over to the mainland in search of prey, where he would throw half a dozen oxen upon his back and tie 3 times as many sheep and hogs round his waist
Nursery
and
rhymes
march back to his own
and
abode.
pastime stories
The giant had
for
done this for many
children
years when Jack
and
resolved
kids
to
of all
destroy him.
ages.
Jack took a horn, a shovel, a pickaxe, his armor, and a dark lantern, and one winter's evening he went to the mountain. There he dug a pit 22 feet deep and 20 broad. He covered the top over so as to make it look like solid ground. He then blew his horn so loudly that the giant awoke and came out of his den crying out, "You saucy villain, you shall pay for this. I'll broil you for my breakfast." He had just finished when, taking one step further, he tumbled headlong into the pit, and Jack struck him a blow on the head with his pickaxe, which killed him. Jack then returned home to cheer his friends with the news. Another giant, called Blunderbore, vowed to be revenged on Jack if ever he should have him in his power. This giant kept an enchanted
Nursery
castle in the
rhymes
midst of a lonely
and
wood.
pastime stories
Sometime after
for
the death of
children
Cormoran,
and
Jack
kids
was
of
passing
all
through a wood and,
ages.
being weary, sat down and went to sleep. The giant, passing by and seeing Jack, carried him to his castle, where he locked him up in a large room, the floor of which was covered with the bodies, skulls, and bones of men and women. Soon after, the giant went to fetch his brother, who was likewise a giant, to take a meal off his flesh. And Jack saw with terror through the bars of his prison the 2 giants approaching. Jack, perceiving in one corner of the room a strong cord, took courage, and making a slip knot at each end, he threw them over their heads and tied it to the window bars. He then pulled till he had choked them. When they were black in the face, he slid down the rope and stabbed them to the heart. Next, Jack took a great bunch of keys from the pocket of Blunderbore
Nursery
and went into
rhymes
the castle again.
and pastime stories for children
And in one
and
of them
kids
found
of
3
all
ladies tied up by
ages.
the hair of their heads and almost starved to death. They told him that their husbands had been killed by the giant, who had then condemned them to be starved to death because they would not eat the flesh of their own dead husbands. "Lady," said Jack, "I have put an end to this monster and his wicked brother, and I give you this castle and all the riches it contains to make some amends for the dreadful pains you have felt." He then very politely gave them the keys of the castle and went further on his journey to Wales. As Jack had but little money, he went on as fast as possible. At length he came to a handsome house. Jack knocked at the door when there came forth a Welsh giant. Jack said he was a traveler who had lost his way, on which the giant made him welcome and led
Nursery
him into a room
rhymes
where there was a
and
good bed to
pastime
sleep
stories for
in. Jack
children
took off his clothes quickly,
and kids of
though
all
he was weary,
ages.
he could not go to sleep. Soon after this, he heard the giant walking backward and forward in the next room and saying to himself, "Oh, here you lodge with me this night. You shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains out quite." "Say you so?" thought Jack. "Are these your tricks upon travelers? But I hope to prove as cunning as you are." And getting out of bed, he groped about the room and at last found a thick, large billet of wood. He laid it in his own place in the bed and then hid himself in a dark corner of the room. The giant, about midnight, entered the apartment, and with his bludgeon struck many blows on the bed in the very place where Jack had laid the log. And then he went back to his own
Nursery
room,
rhymes
thinking he had
and
broken all Jack's
pastime
bones.
stories for
Early in the
children
morning,
and
Jack
kids
put a
of
bold
all
face upon the
ages.
matter and walked into the giant's room to thank him for his lodging. The giant started when he saw him and began to stammer out, "Oh, dear me, is it you? Pray, how did you sleep last night? Did you hear or see anything in the dead of the night?" "Nothing to speak of," said Jack carelessly. "A rat, I believe, gave me 3 or 4 slaps with its tail and disturbed me a little, but I soon went to sleep again." The giant wondered more and more at this, yet he did not answer a word, but went to bring 2 great bowls of hasty pudding for their breakfast. Jack wanted to make the giant believe that he could eat as much as himself, so he contrived to button a leathern bag inside his coat and slip the hasty pudding into the bag while he seemed to put it into his mouth.
Nursery rhymes and pastime stories for children
"Now I will show you a
and
fine
kids
trick.
of all
I can cure
ages.
all wounds with a touch. I could cut off my head in 1 minute and the next put it sound again on my shoulders. You shall see an example." He then took hold of the knife, ripped up the leathern bag, and all the hasty pudding tumbled out upon the floor. "Odd splutter her nails!" cried the Welsh giant, who was ashamed to be outdone by such a little fellow as Jack. "Her can do that herself!" So he snatched up the knife, plunged it into his own stomach, and in a moment dropped down dead. Jack, having hitherto been successful in all his undertakings, resolved not to be idle in future. He therefore furnished himself with a horse, a cap of knowledge, a sword of sharpness, shoes of swiftness, and an invisible coat, the better to perform the wonderful enterprises that lay
Nursery
before him.
rhymes and
He
pastime
traveled over high
stories
hills,
for
and on the third
children
day
and
came
kids
to a
of
large
all
and spacious
ages.
forest through which his road lay. Scarcely had he entered the forest when he beheld a monstrous giant dragging along by the hair of their heads a handsome knight and his lady. Jack alighted from his horse, and tying him to an oak tree, put on his invisible coat under which he carried his sword of sharpness. When he came up to the giant, he made several strokes at him, but could not reach his body, but wounded his thighs in several places, and at length, putting both hands to his sword and aiming with all his might, he cut off both his legs. Then Jack, setting his foot upon his neck, plunged his sword into the giant's body, when the monster gave a groan and expired. The knight and his lady thanked Jack for their deliverance and invited him to their house to receive a proper reward for his services.
Nursery
"No,"
rhymes
said Jack,
and
"it cannot
pastime
be easy
stories
till I find out
for
this monster's
children
habitation."
and kids of
So
all
taking the knight's
ages.
directions, he mounted his horse, and soon after came in sight of another giant, who was sitting on a block of timber waiting for his brother's return. Jack alighted from his horse and putting on his invisible coat, approached and aimed a blow at the giant's head. But, missing his aim, he only cut off his nose. On this, the giant seized his club and laid about him most unmercifully. "Nay," said Jack, "if this be the case, I'd better dispatch you." So jumping upon the block, he stabbed him in the back, whence he dropped down dead. Jack then proceeded on his journey and traveled over hills and dales till, arriving at the foot of a high mountain, he knocked at the door of a lonely house when an old man let him in. When Jack was seated, the hermit thus addressed him: "My son,
Nursery rhymes
on the top of
and
this mountain,
pastime
is an enchanted
stories
castle
for
kept by the
children
giant,
and
Galagantus,
kids of
and a
all
vile magician.
ages.
I lament the fate of a duke's daughter whom they seized as she was walking in her father's garden and brought hither transformed into a deer." Jack promised that in the morning, at the risk of his life, he would break the enchantment, and after a sound sleep he rose early, put on his invisible coat, and got ready for the attempt. When he had climbed to the top of the mountain, he saw 2 fiery griffins, but he passed between them without the least fear of danger, for they could not see him because of his invisible coat. On the castle gate he found a golden trumpet under which were written these lines: "Whoever can this trumpet blow shall cause the giant's overthrow." As soon as Jack had read this, he seized the trumpet and blew a
Nursery
shrill
rhymes
blast which made the
and
gates fly open
pastime
and the very castle
stories
itself
for
tremble.
children and
The giant and
kids
the
of all
conjurer now
ages.
knew that their wicked course was at an end, and they stood biting their thumbs and shaking with fear. Jack, with his sword of sharpness, soon killed the giant, and the magician was then carried away by a whirlwind. And every knight and beautiful lady who had been changed into birds and beasts returned to their proper shapes. The castle vanished away like smoke, and the head of the giant Galagantus was then sent to King Arthur. The knights and ladies rested that night at the old man's hermitage, and next day they set out for the court. Jack then went up to the king and gave his majesty an account of all his fierce battles. Jack's fame had now spread through the whole country, and at the king's desire,
The 12 Huntsmen by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a king's son who had a bride whom he loved very much. And when he was sitting beside her and very happy, news came that his father lay sick unto death, and desired to see him once again before his end. Then he said to his beloved, "I must now go and leave you. I give you a ring as a remembrance of me. When I am king, I will return and fetch you." So he rode away, and when he reached his father, the latter was dangerously ill and near his death. He said to him, "Dear son, I wish to see you once again before my end. Promise me to marry as I wish." And he named a certain king's daughter who was to be his wife. The son was in such trouble that he did not think what he was doing and said, "Yes, dear father, your will shall be done." And thereupon the king shut his eyes and died. When therefore the son had been proclaimed king, and the time of mourning was over, he was forced to keep the promise which he had given his father, and caused the king's daughter to be asked in marriage, and she was promised to him. His first betrothed heard of this, and fretted so much about his faithfulness that she nearly died. Then her father said to her, "Dearest child, why are you so sad? You shall have whatsoever you will." She thought for a moment and said, "Dear father, I wish for 11 girls exactly like myself in face, figure, and size." The father said, "If it be possible, your desire shall be fulfilled." And he caused a search to be made in his whole kingdom until 11 young maidens were found who exactly resembled his daughter in face, figure, and size. When they came to the king's daughter, she had 12 suits of huntsmen's clothes made, all alike, and the 11 maidens had to put on the huntsmen's clothes, and she herself put on the 12th suit. Thereupon she took her leave of her father, and rode away with them, and rode to the court of her former betrothed, whom she loved so dearly. Then she asked if he required any huntsmen, and if he would take all of them into his service. The king looked at her and did not know her, but as they were such handsome fellows, he said yes, and that he would willingly take them, and now they were the king's 12 huntsmen. The king, however, had a lion which was a wondrous animal, for he knew all concealed and secret things. It came to pass that one evening he said to the king, You think you have 12 huntsmen? Yes, said the king, they are 12 huntsmen. The lion continued, You are mistaken. They are 12 girls. The king said, That cannot be true. How will you prove that to me? Oh, just let some peas be strewn into the antechamber, answered the lion, and then you will soon see. Men have a firm step, and when they walk over peas, none of them stir. But girls trip and skip and drag their feet, and the peas roll about. The king was well pleased with the counsel, and caused the peas to be strewn. There was, however, a servant of the king's who favored the huntsmen, and when he heard that they were going to be put to this test, he went to them and repeated everything, and said, The lion wants to make the king believe that you are girls. Then the king's daughter thanked him, and said to her maidens, Show some strength and step firmly on the peas. So next morning when the king had the 12 huntsmen called before him, and they came into the antechamber where the peas were lying, they stepped so firmly on them, and had such a strong, sure walk, that not one of the peas either rolled or stirred. Then they went away again, and the king said to the lion, You have lied to me. They walk just like men. The lion said, They have been informed that they were going to be put to the test, and have assumed some strength. Just let 12 spinning wheels be brought into the antechamber, and they will go to them and be pleased with them, and that is what no man would do. The king liked the advice, and had the spinning wheels placed in the antechamber. But the servant who was so well disposed to the huntsmen went to them, and disclosed the project. So when they were alone, the king's daughter said to her 11 girls, Constrained, and do not look round at the spinning wheels. And next morning when the king had his 12 huntsmen summoned, they went through the antechamber, and never once looked at the spinning wheels. Then the king again said to the lion, You have deceived me. They are men, for they have not looked at the spinning wheels. The lion replied, They have restrained themselves. The king, however, would no longer believe the lion. The 12 huntsmen always followed the king to the chase, and his liking for them continually increased. Now it came to pass that once when they were out hunting, news came that the king's bride was approaching. When the true bride heard that, it hurt her so much that her heart was almost broken, and she fell fainting to the ground. The king thought something had happened to his dear huntsman, ran up to him, and wanting to help him, drew his glove off. Then he saw the ring which he had given to his first bride, and when he looked in her face, he recognized her. Then his heart was so touched that he kissed her, and when she opened her eyes, he said, You are mine, and I am yours, and no one in the world can alter that. He sent a messenger to the other bride, and entreated her to return to her own kingdom, for he had a wife already, and someone who had just found an old key did not require a new one. Thereupon, the wedding was celebrated, and the lion was again taken into favor, because, after all,
Section 5 of American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matthew Reese. The Enchanted Types. One time, a Nook became tired of his beautiful life and longed for something new to do. The Nooks have more wonderful powers than any other immortal folk, except perhaps the fairies and Ryls. So one would suppose that a Nook who might gain anything he desired by a simple wish could not be otherwise than happy and contented. But such was not the case with Popopo, the Nook we are speaking of. He had lived thousands of years, and had enjoyed all the wonders he could think of. Yet life had become as tedious to him now as it might be to one who was unable to gratify a single wish. Finally, by chance, Popopo thought of the Earth people who dwell in cities, and so he resolved to visit them, and see how they lived. This would surely be fine amusement, and serve to pass away many wearisome hours. Therefore, one morning, after a breakfast so dainty that you could scarcely imagine it, Popopo set out for the earth, and at once was in the midst of a big city. His own dwelling was so quiet and peaceful that the roaring noise of the town startled him. His nerves were so shocked that, before he had looked around 3 minutes, he decided to give up the adventure, and instantly return home. This satisfied for a time his desire to visit the earth cities, but soon the monotony of his existence again made him restless, and gave him another thought. At night the people slept, and the cities would be quiet. He would visit them at night. So, at the proper time, Popopo transported himself in a jiffy to a great city, where he began wandering about the streets. Everyone was in bed, no wagons rattled along the pavements, no throngs of busy men shouted and helloed. Even the policemen slumbered slyly, and there happened to be no prowling thieves abroad. soothed by the stillness, Popopo began to enjoy himself. He entered many of the houses and examined their rooms with much curiosity. Locks and bolts made no difference to a Nook, and he saw as well in darkness as in daylight. After a time, he strolled into the business portion of the city. Stores are unknown among the immortals who have no need of money or of barter and exchange, so Popopo was greatly interested by the novel sight of so many collections of goods and merchandise. During his wanderings, he entered a millinery shop, and was surprised to see within a large glass case a great number of women's hats, each bearing in one position or another a stuffed bird. Indeed, some of the most elaborate hats had 2 or 3 birds upon them. Now, Nooks are the especial guardians of birds and love them dearly. To see so many of his little friends shut up in a glass case annoyed and grieved Popopo, who had no idea they had purposely been placed upon the hats by the milliner. So he slid back one of the doors of the case, gave the little chirruping whistle of the Nooks that all birds know well, and called, "Come, friends, the door is open. Fly out." Popopo did not know the birds were stuffed, but, stuffed or not, every bird is bound to obey a Nook's whistle and a Nook's call. So they left the hats, flew out of the case, and began fluttering about the room. "Poor dears," said the kind-hearted Nook, "you long to be in the fields and forests again." Then he opened the outer door for them and cried, "Off with you! Fly away, my beauties, and be happy again." The astonished birds at once obeyed, and when they had soared away into the night air, the Nook closed the door and continued his wandering through the streets. By dawn he saw many interesting sights, but day broke before he had finished the city, and he resolved to come the next evening, a few hours earlier. As soon as it was dark the following day, he came again to the city, and on passing the millinery shop, noticed a light within. Entering, he found 2 women, one of whom leaned her head upon the table and sobbed bitterly, while the other strove to comfort her. Of course, Popopo was invisible to mortal eyes, so he stood by and listened to their conversation. "Cheer up, sister," said one. "Even though your pretty birds have all been stolen, the hats themselves remain." "Alas," cried the other, who was the milliner, "no one will buy my hats partly trimmed, for the fashion is to wear birds upon them. If I cannot sell my goods, I shall be utterly ruined." Then she renewed her sobbing, and the Nook stole away, feeling a little ashamed to realize that in his love for the birds he had unconsciously wronged one of the earth people, and made her unhappy. This thought brought him back to the millinery shop later in the night, when the 2 women had gone home. He wanted in some way to place the birds upon the hats, that the poor woman might be happy again. So he searched until he came upon a nearby cellar full of little gray mice, who lived quite undisturbed and gained a livelihood by gnawing through the walls into neighboring houses and stealing food from the pantries. "Here are just the creatures, Popopo, to place upon the women's hats. Their fur is almost as soft as the plumage of the birds, and it strikes me that mice are remarkably pretty and graceful animals. Moreover, they now pass their lives in stealing, and were they obliged to remain always upon women's hats, their morals would be much improved." So he exercised charm that drew all the mice from the cellar, and placed them upon the hats in the glass case, where they occupied the places the birds had vacated, and looked very becoming, at least in the eyes of the unworldly Nook. To prevent their running about and leaving the hats, Popopo rendered them motionless, and then he was so pleased with his work that he decided to remain in the shop and witness the delight of the milliner, when she saw how daintily her hats were now trimmed. She came in the early morning accompanied by her sister, and her face wore a sad and resigned expression. After sweeping and dusting the shop, and drawing the blinds, she opened the case and took out a hat. But when she saw a tiny gray mouse nestling among the ribbons and laces, she gave a loud shriek and, dropping the hat, sprang with one bound to the top of the table. The sister, knowing the shriek to be one of fear, leapt upon a chair and exclaimed, "What is it? Oh, what is it?" "A mouse!" gasped the milliner, trembling with terror. Popopo, seeing this commotion, now realized that mice are especially disagreeable to human beings, and that he had made a grave mistake in placing them upon the hats. So he gave a low whistle of command that was heard only by the mice. Instantly, they all jumped from the hats, dashed out the open door of the glass case, and scampered away to their cellar. But this action so frightened the milliner and her sister that after giving several loud screams, they fell upon their backs on the floor and fainted away. Popopo was a kind-hearted Nook, but on witnessing all this misery, caused by his own ignorance of the ways of humans, he straightway wished himself at home, and so left the poor women to recover as best they could. Yet yet he could not escape a sad feeling of responsibility, and after thinking upon the matter, he decided that since he had caused the milliner's unhappiness by freeing the birds, he could set the matter right by restoring them to the glass case. He loved the birds, and disliked to condemn them to slavery again, but that seemed the only way to end the trouble. So he set off to find the birds. They had flown a long distance, but it was nothing to Popo to reach them in a second, and he discovered them sitting upon the branches of a big chestnut tree and singing gaily. When they saw the Nook, the birds cried, "Thank you, Popo, thank you for setting us free." "Do not thank me," returned the Nook, "for I have come to send you back to the millinery shop." "Why?" demanded a blue jay angrily, while the others stopped their songs. "Because I find the woman considers you her property, and your loss has caused her much unhappiness," answered Popo. "But remember how unhappy we were in her glass case," said a robin redbreast bravely. "And as for being her property, you are a Nook, and the natural guardian of all birds, so you know that nature created us free. To be sure, wicked men shot and stuffed us, and sold us to the milliner, but the idea of our being her property is nonsense." Popo was puzzled. "If I leave you free," he said, "wicked men will shoot you again, and you will be no better off than before." "Boo!" exclaimed the blue jay. "We cannot be shot now, for we are stuffed. Indeed, 2 men fired several shots at us this morning, but the bullets only ruffled our feathers and buried themselves in our stuffing. We do not fear men now." "Listen," said Popo sternly, for he felt the birds were getting the best of the argument. "The poor milliner's business will be ruined if I do not return you to her shop. It seems you are necessary to trim the hats properly. It is the fashion for women to wear birds upon their headgear. So the poor milliner's wares, although beautified by lace and ribbons, are worthless unless you are perched upon them." "Fashions," said a blackbird solemnly, "are made by men. What law is there among birds or Nooks that requires us to be the slaves of fashion?" "What have we to do with fashions, anyway?" screamed a linnet. "If it were the fashion to wear Nooks perched upon women's hats, would you be contented to stay there? Answer me, Popo." But Popo was in despair. He could not wrong the birds by sending them back to the milliner, nor did he wish the milliner to suffer by their loss. So he went home to think what could be done. After much meditation, he decided to consult the king of the Nooks, and going at once to his majesty, he told him the whole story. The king frowned. "This should teach you the folly of interfering with earth people," he said. "But since you have caused all this trouble, it is your duty to remedy it. Our birds cannot be enslaved, that is certain. Therefore, you must have the fashions changed, so it will no longer be stylish for women to wear birds upon their hats." "How shall I do that?" asked Popo. "Easily enough. Fashions often change among the earth people, who tire quickly of any one thing. When they read in their newspapers and magazines that the style is so-and-so, they never question the matter, but at once obey the mandate of fashion. So you must visit the newspapers and magazines and enchant the types." "Enchant the types?" echoed Popo in wonder. "Just so. Make them read that it is no longer the fashion to wear birds upon hats. That will afford relief to your poor milliner, and at the same time set free thousands of our darling birds who have been so cruelly used." Popo thanked the wise king and followed his advice. The office of every newspaper and magazine in the city was visited by the Nook, and then he went to other cities until there was not a publication in the land that had not had a new fashion note in its pages. Sometimes Popo enchanted the types, so that whoever read the print would see only what the Nook wished them to. Sometimes he called upon the busy editors and befuddled their brains until they wrote exactly what he wanted them to. Mortals seldom know how greatly they are influenced by fairies, Nooks, and Ryls, who often put thoughts into their heads that only the wise little immortals could have conceived. The following morning, when the poor milliner looked over her newspaper, she was overjoyed to read that no woman could now wear a bird upon her hat and be in style, for the newest fashion required only ribbons and laces.